Hello, Biocast members. Welcome to an exclusive Biocast Extra. So, in this episode, we are going to be discussing the background of the Egyptian economy during the time of Cleopatra. And I'm sorry for being a little retarded. I'm very excited because this is some really exciting subject matter. Now, I'm actually really fascinated by the way the Egyptian economy worked because it was, as we discussed in the Cleopatra episode, as you'll remember, it was the breadbasket of the ancient world. Ancient Egypt had a lot of power because it just, it was so easy to do stuff. It was so easy to grow crops and feed people, and the Nile River provided all of this abundance. I mean, Herodotus literally wrote that he thought that people who grew crops in Egypt didn't do any work. They were just, in his mind, they were just sitting around having a grand old time playing the flute while the crops grew themselves, and they just kind of traded them for goods that everyone else had to work for, which is really interesting. But during the episode, the Biocast episode, I mentioned that the economy of ancient Egypt was very similar to the Soviet Union, right? If we're going to make a close to modern comparison, that's the best way to do it. And I actually think that's still an accurate way of viewing things. However, there is some debate. This is one of those historical things that, you can really get into some controversy here. And what we're going to be going through here is some of the different sides and perspectives about how this view of the ancient Egyptian economy has kind of shifted in the last few years. So, older historians argued for state control, right? Because Ptolemy II's document, the instructions of Diakites to his oikonomos, if that's the way you pronounce that. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation. But it described a horrible bureaucracy, right? That's the document that most people pointed to and said, oh, look, this is how bad the ancient Egyptian economy was. Look at all the taxes and everything that they had to do. However, what they've recently discovered is that this was a document of theory that was never implemented in law. Or if it was implemented in law, they're having a hard time finding evidence to support that. And that really changes our view of the Ptolemaic economy, right? Because, for all these years, we thought this is exactly how it was. This is the way it was supposed to be. Well, you find out, this was just like a government theory that, they were going to maybe implement someday. Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? Right? I mean, imagine 2,000 years from now, someone discovers some crazy tax plans by the FBI that they were planning on implementing to, really suck every penny out of the taxpayer that they could. And for a long time, that they imagine that's how our economy works. Now, that could certainly happen at some point in the future. I mean, who knows, right? When you're not in direct communication with the people that you're studying, it's really difficult to get a good grasp of anything that went on, right? Especially with ancient times. I mean, the fact that we know anything about ancient Egypt is really a wonder. I mean, you got to think about, this is more than 2,000 years ago now. More than 2,000 years, they didn't have any photos, they didn't have any videos, they didn't really even have that great of record keeping. I mean, we have archaeology and we have a handful of ancient sources. Now, luckily, we have been blessed with a bunch of people being inspired by history to write the different histories, and, people like Diodorus, Plutarch, I mean, even Caesar wrote history. That's part of the reason he's looked so favorably upon. I mean, all the greats write history, right? I mean, Winston Churchill even wrote, the history of World War II and his time as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I mean, people in power, they write the history. But Writing history is kind of a recent thing in some ways, right? But that we can go on that tangent another time. But one of the important things that we discovered, the historians discovered, was that there was not this horrible bureaucracy as people had previously believed, such as defined career paths, clear chains of command, and clearly specified areas for responsibility for its officials. Right? So that's part of what makes a bureaucracy work. It might be mind-numbing and boring and miserable, and no one wants to do it, but man, it's got to be done. But, it turned out that there really wasn't all of this bureaucracy like we had previously believed. In other words, the Ptolemaic administration was far from being a rationally designed and efficient bureaucratic machine intended to manage a complex, planned economy. It wasn't this brilliant, planned out thing. It was really it was a lot closer to being random chaos than it was anything resembling order. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't horrible control over the economy, right? There are historical sources that do confirm that, there was a lot of government control over the economy, what you could do with your crops, the kind of businesses and laws that you had to abide by. I had one tangent that I mentioned in the Biocast episode itself, where government officials were so corrupt that they passed laws, or they convinced the monarch, someone like Cleopatra, to pass a law that made it insanely difficult to, let's say, grow olive trees or olive bushes. I don't know, man. I'm not a farmer. Well, anyway, to grow olives, right? So one of these government officials, they want to grow olives. They want to be the number one person in the country at doing that. They tell Cleopatra, listen, I'm going to start this giant company. I need you to pass a law, make it hard for all the, peasants to compete with me. And then they would just amass crazy amounts of wealth because what do you know? You don't have to play by the rules. You're the government. It's crazy. It is some crazy stuff. Imagine that kind of stuff was going on today. And in some cases, it actually does go on today, scarily enough. Someone goes from, I know Monsanto is a big one in agribusiness. Everyone always complains about them, and with some legitimacy, right? There is cause to complain about them, but, they'll go from working for Monsanto, then they'll go start working for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They'll give some kind of favorable laws or whatever to Monsanto, favorable conditions, and then they go back to working for Monsanto. And sometimes that happens with people in the House of Representatives. Sometimes that happens with the Senate. When political power and economic power get too tied up, that's when you start really running into problems with your society. And you can really draw some comparisons, with ancient Ptolemaic Egypt to today, because, there's a lot of similar stuff going on. Now, granted, it was much worse in Ptolemaic Egypt. Thankfully, we don't have a hereditary monarchy. That would suck. Number one, you're probably being ruled by someone has Down syndrome, someone that was, incest. Thankfully today they're all relegated to Alabama. I'm sorry if you're from Alabama, but it was really a tough time. And with the way it was, there was just all this government control. It was a really, really horrible place to be an entrepreneur. It killed the entrepreneurial spirit. Why on earth would you go out and try to compete with the government in the free market? And especially, it's even worse in some ways too, because the Ptolemaic regime was very much protectionist, meaning that they passed laws that favored the Egyptian economy over foreign businesses, right? And the big one was Rome, right? So part of what big imperial countries tend to do is before they ever invade somewhere else, they'll have economic ties there. And what Rome would do is, they would have, some Roman merchant would go set up shop in Egypt, take a business model that worked in Rome, made him very rich, take it somewhere else, and start thriving there. And that's how you really start to get control of the economy over there. Or even just generally trading with those foreign nations. And what the Ptolemies did was that they really favored their own people. They favored their own economy over Rome or the Seleucid Empire or any of the other kingdoms during this time. There were a million different nation states at this time. But generally, they tried to favor their own, right? And that's something that's really important for your country. If you're independent economically, that is a good position to be in. Now, anyone that gets control that's smart, you know that you don't want to depend on someone else for food because that's a lot of leverage that they have over you if things get going bad, right? I'm sorry, I always talk about Nazi Germany, but we're going to talk about Nazi Germany. When Hitler got control of Germany, one of the first things he did was, he tried moving the German economy away from depending on outside food places, right? He didn't want to trade with Poland and France and, all these other countries that were better at agriculture than Germany was because, that's a lot of dependence. It's a lot of dependence. It puts you in a position of weakness. And if someone says, hey, if you don't do what we say, if you don't abide by our rules, by our laws, and give us what we want, we're gonna let your people starve. That is a rough position to be in. I mean, I think it was Thomas Jefferson. I know the founding fathers were definitely concerned over this, how the importance of food and freedom is food is like number one, maybe not number one, but it's definitely up there when it comes to freedom. Because if the government controls your food, they control you. Imagine, whatever small town decides, hey, we're going to, screw the government. We're going to declare ourselves our own independent country within the United States. Well, they take away your ability to farm or hell, even your ability to import food. I mean, how many places on earth are even self-sustaining agriculturally anymore, right? I mean, imagine the only food that you could eat, the county you live in, and the food that it grows is the only food that you can eat. You're going to get real skinny real fast. It's going to be rough. But anyway, getting back to this. So instead, it was a system riddled with irrationalities and inefficiencies, whose primary purpose was to control the king's Egyptian subjects and to extract the maximum amount of revenue from them. So it really was not about being a fair and just and encouraging government. It was just about getting the most money from the peasants that they could. That's what it was all about, all along. And when you look at some of these regimes, it really goes to show. And paradoxically enough, the people who operate with those kinds of principles in mind, right? Let's protect me, my people, my friends, and screw the average people. They end up getting overthrown sooner or later. Cleopatra may have done more than any of the other Ptolemies to improve relations with the common people, but it was not enough. It was not enough. But anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed this Biocast Extra. Thank you so much for being a supporter. It really means a lot that you go out of your way to support free, ad-free historical content. I really do personally appreciate that because people like you make this stuff possible. It is very difficult being a content creator in the modern day and age with, YouTube demonetization and algorithms and it's a crazy time to be alive, man, especially as a content creator. But I really do appreciate you. People like you are why there is good content that is free on the internet. Thank you so much for being a supporter, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.